All right, everyone. So I think we will make a start. So welcome to today's free Foothold webinar. I'm Catherine Drake. I'm the Communications and Digital Events Officer at Foothold. I'm a new face. I started just over a month ago now, and I'm going to be taking over the digital side of things. So basically anything to do with Foothold's digital support, that's me, including webinars like this. So it's really nice to join you today. So I'm joined today by two different speakers. First up, we've got Katie Cullen-Birtwhistle. You may have seen her on previous mental health webinars that we've done here with Foothold. She is a psychotherapist, a mediator, and a wellbeing trainer. And we're also joined by our guest, Jonathan Wilson, who is a public speaker and an ambassador at the organisation Stop Hurt at Work. They advocate for safer workplace culture. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what today's webinar is about, and then we'll do a little introduction to Foothold as well before we begin. So today's webinar is creating safe workplaces, important conversations about bullying. So it's important to have these conversations about bullying, harassment and discrimination. It's often a difficult conversation to have, but a very vital one. Everyone deserves to work in a place where they can be and feel mentally healthy and thrive in a safe working environment. And this webinar is for everyone. So this is whether you may have experienced workplace bullying yourself, whether you think you have witnessed it in the past or are perhaps witnessing it now or are unsure, or if neither of these apply to you, but you would like the tools to recognise the signs and be part of building a healthy workplace culture and environment. So everyone is very welcome. As you can imagine, with this subject matter, we will be covering some difficult and often potentially distressing topics and experiences in today's webinar. So I would just remind everyone to look after themselves in whatever way that looks to you. So just remember, for example, that this is a recorded webinar. So if you need to take a moment and you would like to revisit the content at another time, we will send you out the link afterwards, about a week after the webinar, and you'll receive this content to watch at your leisure. So just do what is best for you and your mental health today. Also, as I said, we have a guest speaker. So as with all guest speakers, we just have to say that, of course, their opinions and their experiences are their own. They're not necessarily those of Footholds, but this is why we do it. Guests are very important to us because it's important to share their stories and give them a platform to share their lived experience with people on the subject that we're covering in a webinar. So we are very excited to have Jonathan with us today. Thank you so much. So before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit more about Foothold. I'm just going to, here we go, a little bit more about Foothold. So we have been supporting engineers and their families since 1890, so that's 133 years this year, to ensure that no engineer or their family needs to face life's challenges without support. We know that life can be very unpredictable, and in the busyness of our lives, we can forget that being well is as important as doing well. We're funded by engineers for engineers, and this is a starting point, giving engineers the tools they need to make their lives better. So what kind of support do we offer? Well, we offer all kinds of support in the forms of grants, befriending services, and all sorts. So we help people with financial matters, health and well-being, legal issues, care and disability, their work life, neurodiversity, and housing. We have partnerships with Anxiety UK, with Shelter. We have legal specialists that we work alongside to make sure that our engineering community get whatever support they need when they need it. And then there's the digital support, which is where I come in. So this is everything that is, on the whole, self-guided, always accessible, and most crucially, always free to our engineering community to use. So our digital health and wellbeing support allows us to reach many more people than we can through our direct support alone. This includes webinars like this, our expert blogs, our Foothold app, which gives financial and legal support and is free to download, our Wellbeing Hub, which gives advice and support on physical and mental health, and our Differently Wired Hub. This is a relatively new one. It's part of our neurodiversity package of support, and it gives advice on neurodiversity conditions and where you can, it sort of flag posts where you can get support from and further advice if you would like it and need it. At this stage, we would also ask if you would consider making a donation to Foothold today so that we can continue doing this, for example, this webinar series, but all of the support we offer. This webinar is brought to you for free today, thanks to generous donations and gifts in wills from engineers and their families. So we would love if you would consider making a donation via our website. You can see the address at the bottom there, myfoothold.org/donate direct. We're going through a bit of a challenging time as a charity. Some of you may be aware that we're a charity that's independent of the IET, but we do support IET members as well as the wider engineering community. In the past, the IET people have donated as part of their membership renewal with the IET, but this is no longer an option as of the 1st of October 2023, which, as you can imagine, has been quite a blow on donations coming in and will affect the number of people we can support. So yeah, just a small amount, the amount that you would have perhaps donated with renewing your membership, £25 a year, can help us continue to support engineers through life's challenges, and we would be incredibly grateful for that. So that's pretty much it from me. So I'd like you to enjoy today's Foothold webinar. I hope you get a lot from it. If you have a question, we have the little Q&A button in the top corner. You can click it at any time, type in a question, and at the end of both of our speakers having spoken, we will go through the questions and our speakers will divvy up the questions and answer them, whoever's most appropriate to answer them. Yeah, so without much further ado, I will introduce you to Katie Cullen-Birtwistle, who will be talking you through what bullying, harassment and discrimination can look like in the workplace.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. Some of you may have seen me before in sessions. As Catherine said, I've delivered a few webinars now for Foothold, which I've always really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to delivering this one today. Creating safe workplaces, important conversations about bullying. So as Catherine said at the beginning, my background is I'm a psychotherapist, a counsellor, a workplace mediator and a wellbeing trainer. So I've delivered sessions on this topic in the past, so I hope that you find this afternoon's session helpful, and of course Jonathan will take over from me once I've given kind of more of the, I guess, more of the information around what bullying and harassment is, what it can look like, you know, how it can present itself. So there's no kind of personal experiences from me. That's obviously for Jonathan to do his part on that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so just to run through the agenda in the time that I've got here. Hopefully what we will cover, or what I will cover, is to be able to define concepts of bullying and harassment in a work context, to be able to be aware of the legal context of bullying and harassment, and finally to explore some resolution processes and support services. Obviously this, you know, the kind of caveat to this, I would say this is a huge subject. There is, you know, I'm sure I could speak for hours and hours about this, you know, this issue, this situation that can arise in the workplace. So this is kind of giving you a kind of fairly brief overview, really, but there's, as with all of our subjects, there's always, you know, much more that can be said, but this is definitely, hopefully, some informative suggestions on what bullying and harassment is, what you can do about it, yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So it's really important just to consider, first of all, what is bullying and what is harassment. So as the slide says, bullying can be described as a bully is a person who's coercing others by fear, persecute or oppress by force or threat. And of course, bullying, offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behaviour, and abuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the reciprocant. And that actually comes from ACAS, and obviously the bully definition is a definition from the dictionary. Next slide, please. So what is harassment? So to harass is obviously to trouble and annoy continually or make repeated attacks on. And then a quote from the Equality Act 2010, a person subjects another to harassment when they engage in unwanted conduct, which has the effect of violating that other person's dignity or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for them. So not only do these standard definitions give us clarification, they can also provide us with some understanding as to how it may feel to experience them, their impact, and we'll focus on that a little bit further on in the session. Oh, thank you, Catherine. I didn't have to say next slide then. We're in sync. So some of you may be familiar already with the bully triangle. It's an adaptation of a theoretical dynamic model of social interaction. So it's been designed to help us understand what what the different roles people have within a situation of bullying. So it can help us to illustrate the types of behaviours and roles that people play or may be manipulated into playing. So it's worth noting that situations are often fluid. We adopt different roles in response to different circumstances. So in the model, you can see the 3 different roles there: the persecutor, the bully, the victim and the rescuer. So I'll just go through a little bit of description on each of those. And I think just to add, actually, before I sort of start this, as we're getting into kind of maybe some of the slightly more uncomfortable part of this this topic, as Catherine said, this might resonate, so look after yourself if anybody is listening and feeling maybe in this situation themselves. So please do look after yourself. So the perpetrator as the bully. Bullies are often insecure and vulnerable themselves, and bullying helps them conceal their own insecurities and create that appearance that they're actually in control. They may have underlying low self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness, have a fear of change, and perhaps of themselves have been a victim in the past. Now, it's really important to note there, this doesn't therefore make it okay. What I'm saying here is that some of the kind of psychological background of what a bully can be is some of the reasons why they might be behaving in the way that they are. When we come to the victim, a victim can perhaps be somebody who's fairly non-confrontational, perhaps quite passive in their personality and submissive, maybe naturally quite shy, meek or quiet. And in the workplace, sometimes somebody that's new in a workplace, especially if there's not a particularly healthy culture in that workplace. And so then, therefore, sometimes quite vulnerable. And then the rescuer, this could be potentially a co-worker or a bystander who could be aware of the bullying that's happening, either overt or covert, and I'll explain a bit about that in a bit. And maybe also support instigation of the resolution, should that be needed, or if that's where they feel they can help. So just a little bit of an understanding there of the bully triangle. Next slide, please. So if bullying and harassment has not been explicitly disclosed, it can be difficult sometimes to identify what bullying and harassment is looking like at work. But there may be some signs that are present that you can recognise in an individual at work, and these are just some of them. I mean, of course, when we come to any type of list of different signs or symptoms, it's never exhaustive. There might be ones that haven't been thought about, but these are what we deem, or I deem really, as the most important or the most prevalent, I guess. So there could be a decreased productivity. There could be changes to work performance, an increase perhaps in sickness, absence, changes in relationships with their co-workers, with the team engagement, and a general change in attitude or behaviour. So it's worth considering that these presentations not only relate to bullying and harassment, there may be other factors that have caused changes, but however, noticing such signs may enable you to take a proactive approach to facilitate a conversation with that individual and offer support if required. So we can't always say that just because these signs are there that bullying is potentially happening, but it may well be something that you can notice, especially depending on the circumstance, if you're, how much you're connected to that person or how much you've seen. Next slide, please. So I mentioned just a moment ago about overt and covert bullying and harassment, and so I thought it was important that we look at both of those, both overt and covert, and some of the potential signs. So it's worth noting that it's obviously different for different people, and again, going back to that concept of, that any kind of list or any sort of suggestion of this is the typical behaviour. These are the main points. There could be more as well. But we know that when overt bullying and harassment takes place, some of these signs are obviously the ones that are going to be noticed. Being shouted at, being the target of abusive or insulting comments or perhaps offensive language, being the target of practical jokes, being the target of unjustified criticisms or complaints, being the recipient of physical intimidation, perhaps being a victim of misinformation or rumours, so gossiping, being excluded or socially isolated, or if you're actually in the workplace, there could be that physical tampering with somebody's employees or personal belongings. The next slide, please. The bullying and harassment can be harder to spot when carried out in that subtle manner, where the perpetrator perhaps appears outwardly pleasant and friendly. These people may isolate vulnerable people and slowly create an environment where the victim feels undermined and gradually loses confidence. So here are some examples of what covert bullying and harassment could look like. Targeting jokes, removing areas of responsibility without cause. In particular, we're talking here obviously in a work context, remember, so that could be happening with a kind of line manager or somebody more senior. Spreading rumours, repeatedly shunning or exclusion of a colleague, non-verbal innuendos, withholding information, excessive micromanaging, which can often happen, again in that work context, and perhaps setting unreasonable timelines or constantly changing deadlines. So with overt, it's obviously, quite obvious when we think about some of the points that I made in the previous slide, where you can really see that behaviour. It's kind of quite clear. And obviously with covert, sometimes this can get a little bit more mixed up in perhaps, in the way that perhaps a culture is in a workplace. If you think about kind of targeting jokes, I know that I've certainly supported clients in organisations that I've worked in where perhaps a workplace culture is there's quite a lot of what is deemed as kind of banter. And whilst that might be, you know, okay for some people, of course, it can be harder then to see where the line is between where the banter ends and actually where this is now turning into something more that's, you know, more related to kind of bullying or harassment, and can be harder to spot, and can also be more difficult for a manager potentially to step in, especially if they're part of that kind of culture. So quite often, you know, there's for certain organisations, or any organisation really, where that might be happening, then it, you know, it's really important to kind of be aware, as aware as possible, of you know, the culture of the organisation, and also whether some of this is actually happening in teams or with staff. Can I have the next slide, please? So this slide provides a kind of snapshot really of the impact of bullying on both psychological, behavioural and organisational kind of impacts. So when it comes to the victim, everyone who is a victim of bullying and or harassment will of course have their own individual reaction, which will again vary according to their own personality, and their kind of state of their mental health, plus the intensity or the nature of the bullying and harassment. So of course, like I've just said, you know, for some people, you know, that kind of like banter or those jokes can, you know, for some people they're okay about that. It doesn't bother them so much, whereas of course for others, depending on perhaps their own situation, their own upbringing, whatever else they've been through in their life, that might be really painful and really trigger something that's difficult. When it comes to the perpetrator, in some cases the accused may be suspended during an investigation, and perhaps in some cases may even lose their jobs. And the organisation, the Health and Safety Executive, estimate that bullying is a key element in stress work related illness and costs employers many millions of pounds of lost days during a year. So we can see on the slide here, and I won't necessarily read out obviously everything on there, but some of the impact on each of those 3 columns there, you know, can obviously be really really difficult, and you know, have a huge impact on all of those. Have the next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit at the beginning about the legal context of bullying and harassment, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this that are listening. There are 9 protected characteristics identified in the Equality Act 2010, and harassment is when bullying or unwanted behaviour relates to any of these following protected characteristics under discrimination law. So age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. There are some differences between the protected characteristics relating to harassment. So an example is harassment relating to pregnancy or maternity is treated differently and could be considered direct discrimination. And in addition, the law on harassment does not cover marriage and civil partnership. So although the protected characteristics often provide the basis for a complainant to come forward, the reality is that many complaints are interrelated. So for example, and can stem from many different sources, such as personality conflicts, miscommunication, misperceptions, misinformation, and different working styles. And I've certainly seen all of that a lot as my role as a workplace mediator. The next slide, please. So when it comes to resolution, I've got a couple of slides on the individual resolution, kind of an informal and then more formal resolution. So in some cases, and really hear the word some, because obviously this isn't necessarily the true for everyone, of course, resolving the situation directly with the perpetrator can provide a solution relatively quickly. But of course, you know, and it's really important to hear this, it depends on the severity and the nature of the specific issues. And of course, I would always advise that if there's any risk of safety, or if the individual feels emotionally not able to, or psychologically not able to discuss that issue, then of course that's not going to be the best way to go. And of course, if the individual does choose to speak to the perpetrator, they should consider maintaining a log of the discussion, should that need to then be escalated if required, because sometimes, of course, sadly, it wouldn't necessarily work just being able to speak. And always remember that advice can be sought either perhaps through human resources as a first point of contact, but also ACAS and citizens' advice as well. Have the next slide, please. So it's important to note that depending on circumstances and the level of your needs and potential associated risks, an individual or an informal resolution may not be relevant, and a more formal resolution might be what's needed, which I'll talk about just in a moment. So an informal resolution, obviously the process there is that to raise the issue in the first place with perhaps a line manager, with somebody from human resources, for example, in that workplace setting where there is that kind of more informal chat, although it can still have a structure to it, but it's not a formal process. And hopefully within that informal chat, that meeting, some resolution can be found, and a review can be put in place to make sure that whatever's discussed or what was agreed can then be reviewed and make sure that things are still working for that person. The next slide, please. And of course, if that's not going to work, which as I said, sadly it may not do, then there might be the need for a more formal resolution. So it doesn't necessarily always go in the kind of linear way that it should, but just for ease on this slide, obviously I'll just talk through each point. So to lodge the complaint initially, we're talking here about an employee raising a grievance. And it hasn't worked talking about it in an informal way. And of course, if this the situation is a serious example of bullying and harassment, so for example, sexual harassment, then of course this is where this formal resolution is going to be needed. An initial response, so this could be your employer sending acknowledgement or notification of the complaint being received, and this in some situations can raise an initial discussion before any further investigations. Then of course there's an investigator who's appointed, quite often in a workplace setting. That's obviously not somebody connected with that individual, or either individuals. The investigation, so obviously there's the gathering of information, any logs, any conversations, witness statements, everything that might be included in that investigation. The findings are communicated in a confidential manner to those individuals relevant to the investigation. Sometimes there's an appeal if the findings are not agreed, or that there's more processes that need to happen. And of course, there needs to be that access to support for everybody that's involved in that situation. and I'll talk just a little bit in a moment on my last slide around mediation. And of course, you know, as with the informal resolution, having that review further down the line can be really helpful for the individual and the organisation to review the grievance to ensure that the outcome has resolved that initial issue. Now, of course, I'm very aware that as I'm talking about this is all very, you know, these things should happen in this way, and it's all very, you know, it's kind of easy, and we know that in real life, unfortunately, it isn't always like that, and grievance processes and investigations can be drawn out for a long time. They don't always work that well. And if, in fact, Catherine, if you can move on to the next slide about mediation, then I can talk just a little bit about that before we finish. So I am a workplace mediator, so I have facilitated quite a few workplace mediations over my kind of career of doing that. And I would say, as a mediator, I'm obviously quite a big believer in it. You know, I think it's a really helpful way to find a good resolution when there's been an issue in the workplace. Quite often, the ones that I've facilitated have been as a result of a grievance. So the kind of result of the grievance has been actually what we think would be really helpful is to have a mediation. And what's really helpful about it, I suppose, a little bit like counselling and therapy, is that because I, as a workplace mediator, have not been involved in or don't work for that organisation where I've facilitated the mediation, I've obviously got that impartial view, which of course I would have anyway as a mediator. And whilst they can be challenging, and you know, I'm not going to say that every one of them has been, you know, super successful, because occasionally they haven't worked. But once people have been able to kind of discuss you know, where their feelings about a particular situation, quite often some common ground can be found. And I'd certainly say that even in quite difficult situations where there's a lot of animosity between people, once we've kind of broken through that, people have come away with a way forward, and a kind of line has been drawn. And obviously the idea about any mediation is it's a kind of future focused exercise, so it's all about, like, you know, how people are going to work together in the future. There are of course situations where this wouldn't necessarily work. So it obviously, you know, there are some situations which perhaps, you know, cannot be mediable, especially when it becomes where the kind of legal aspect is maybe more prevalent. But otherwise, I would say they can be really helpful and can be a good way to solve a workplace dispute. Okay, last slide. So that's kind of the end of my sort of few slides on bullying and harassment. As I said, it's, you know, it's an overview. There's always so much more you can say on this kind of subject. I hope it's been helpful and given a bit of food for thought. And thank you for listening to my part. And I'm sure Jonathan's ready to step in now and do the next part of the session. Thanks.
Hello, thank you very much, Katie. That was really helpful. And so now, having had a basis and an understanding of what bullying and harassment can look like in the workplace, the different forms it can take, and what you can do if you see it or are experiencing it, I would now like to hand over to Jonathan Wilson, who is a public speaker and an advocate for safer workplace culture. He's an ambassador at Stop Hurt at Work, which campaigns for safer workplace culture and an end to workplace bullying. And he has lived experience of, unfortunately, bullying in the workplace, and it has affected his life significantly. And he has a really interesting story to share. So I would like to hand over to him now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. So Yeah, I came to do what I do now because of a personal experience of workplace bullying, and it was absolutely devastating. Probably until I'd been through it, I didn't realise quite how devastating it could be. I spent, up until the point that I was bullied, I'd spent 24 years as a police officer in London. I'd risen to quite a senior rank. I was a detective superintendent, and at the time of being bullied, had been for a couple of years. And I was posted into a command, which was the counter-terrorism command, not through choice, into a role where there was a big emphasis for change in the way that things were done, with a lot of government oversight and pressure. You know, up until that point, I considered myself really resilient. I mean, with 24 years of policing, I'd seen or imagined that I'd seen, witnessed, experienced some of the worst things that life could throw at anyone. And I said, and I was at quite a senior rank. So I went into this role. Now, I'd been in the counter-terrorism command before, and I knew that there was a very strong culture of nepotism. There were people who'd been there for far too long through a number of different ranks, which was quite unusual within policing, because you're normally moved from role to role as you progress through the ranks. But there were people who'd been there through a number of ranks, and there was quite a tight-knit body of people who sort of looked after each other's interests, to the cost of others. So I went into my role, and I was greeted on my first day with a statement from a line manager of, how did you get this role? We already had our own person lined up for this, you know, which was a great welcome. Anyway, I was full of confidence, and with the seniority I got and the experience I got on with my job, and I challenged things that were wrongdoing and the status quo, and tried to do the best I could with the team that I was leading to implement change, which I would say eventually we managed to do quite successfully. However, all of the way through, I found that my line manager and others were isolating me. There were steps made to obstruct proposed change. I had resources taken away from me with no notification. Had information withheld from me. When I went for my first performance development review, my line manager, he gave me a score, which wasn't a bad score, but there was no development in that performance development review, and I questioned why there was no development and what development he thought I needed. He very nervously laughed it off and said it wasn't his job, it was his line manager to tell me that. Again, a year later, when I had a similar performance review, I got the same thing, and I made the same challenge, having expected him this time to be a little bit wiser. So I went through that, but I at the time sort of put this down to just him being a difficult individual, and them being some difficult individuals, and the culture I was working within. I didn't actually sort of at that time recognise it as bullying. And as I said, I consider myself resilient, and I'd push through it. He was then temporarily promoted, and he brought in one of his close followers who'd been a peer of mine, and had been someone else who'd been resistant to the change that I had to implement, into his role. And on that individual's first day in role, I was called down to what I'd describe as an ambush meeting, which is a meeting with no prior notification, no agenda. And I went into his office, and he said to me, two of your managers that work beneath you have been to me to complain that they don't like the way you're speaking to them, and they're thinking about leaving the command. I was absolutely aghast, horrified, because I always considered that I had a very good working relationship with my team. I was someone that was encouraging and empowering with people. So where that came from, I really didn't know. So I asked him, could you tell me who it is that I can resolve it? No, they don't want to be identified. Well, could you please give me some context so I can understand what it is? No, just sort it out. Over the next few months, I was called back to more and more of these ambush meetings, and again and again and again, it was about people who were upset with me from different parts of the command, etc., etc., never identified, was never given any context, etc. Finally, I was called into an ambush meeting, which was again designed to berate me, and I was told that I'd upset partnership agencies that we were working with, which was the Home Office and the Security Service. Now, I had very good relationships with them. They'd constantly been telling me that they were really pleased with the way that the work was going forward and the close partnership work that was being done. And my colleague from the Home Office was actually a very good friend. Had become a very good friend of mine socially as well. Both of them absolutely assured me that they had that there was never any complaints on their side. And my friend from the Home Office had said, you know, if we'd got a problem, you know me, I'd have told you straight to your face. So it started to dawn on me that actually some of this stuff wasn't true, and it was sort of perhaps happening to you know, to sort of undermine me, to make me feel uncertain. It's what I now know as gaslighting, because during the time this was all happening, I became more hypersensitive to the environment around me. I felt like I was treading on eggshells all the time. I started to lose trust and faith in people around me, or any interaction I had, fearing that, you know, that I might have been doing something wrong, and that people were talking behind my back. This is all as a result of these meetings. The final ambush meeting I was called to was, he called me into the office and he said that my previous line manager, who was now his line manager, my second line manager, had said that if I wanted promotion, I needed to leave the command. Well, I had a young daughter and I didn't want promotion. Promotion was the last thing I wanted, and I was actually quite enjoying the work that I was doing and the team that I was working with. So I said, well, I'm not after promotion. I'd like to stay in my role. And at that point, the conversation ended. The following day, he phoned me up and he said that person above him had said that I had to leave anyway because of upsetting the Home Office and the Security Service. And I said to him, well, you know that's not correct, because they have actually come and told you that that's not correct. And the conversation ended again. And then the next day I got a document through saying that I needed to be moved for unspecified development, which again was a little rich, as for the last 2 years I'd been asking my performance development reviews for development, and none have been forthcoming or been identified. And I didn't know what the development I was supposed to be moved for was. I went away and I thought about it really hard. I mean, at this point, I'm going to say I'd had many sleepless nights because of, you know, the actions that had been taking place, the difficulty, the obstructiveness that I've been facing, the lack of cooperation I've been facing, the lack of interest of my line manager in my work, all the support that I'd had. And then following that, the gaslighting, this has become highlighted more. So I'd already been to see the doctor because I'd been suffering from insomnia, and the doctor had said, well, it's probably stress, and I was quite anxious around, you know, the environment around me. And I sat down and thought about it, and I thought, really, you know, this is a point I am actually being targeted, I am being bullied. So I sent an email to one of the most senior, because of my seniority and the seniority of the people involved, I sent an email to one of the most senior officers in the Metropolitan Police and asked for a meeting, saying that I thought I was being bullied. And she agreed to meet me a week later. When I went into that meeting with her, it became quite clear straight away that she'd spent the week speaking to the bullies before she spoke to me. And to every point I raised, she looked at me with cold contempt and said, "That's your view. That's your view." And that's all I recall from that meeting was, "That's your view," in this harsh way. As I lost resolve and had the inclination to say any more because of being rebuffed in this way had dried up, she said, "From everything I hear, you're the problem." I left that meeting. So I described this now, that I entered that meeting a broken man, and I left that man at that meeting absolutely destroyed. This is what I would now term as what's institutional betrayal. You know, when someone's faith in an institution, their trust and in that institution is betrayed, you know, because everything that I'd been told over the last 24 years about if something's wrong, speak up, you know, if you're treated badly, speak up, etc., etc., just gone out of the window. I'd seen the bullies being protected by someone above, etc. So over the months that went on from that, I'd gradually found that my confidence evaporated, really. I was afraid to challenge anyone, even staff that were working below me, or pull anyone up on their work, etc. I had real problems concentrating. I was suffering from constant rumination. I had anxiety. I was taking the stairs up to my office for fear of bumping into people in the lifts, etc., etc. And eventually I went sick. And over the next couple of years, I was on and off sick for months at a time. And, you know, up and for the previous 24 years, I'd barely had a day off sick from work. And in those 2 years, I probably had at least a year, you know, at broken points out of those couple of years off sick. I went through CBT counselling, several blocks of CBT counselling, had other support work, did mindfulness training, etc. Was on all sorts of antidepressants and anxiety medication. Many nights I just sat up, you know, couldn't get to sleep and sat up, you know, aimlessly watching television during the night, but not really concentrating on what's on at that time of night because of the rumination that was going through my mind. And I became quite ill, and eventually I saw a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with trauma and was given trauma counselling. And there was a point at that point that I made a decision that my health had to come first, and I left the police a couple of years earlier than I should have done, you know, at significant cost to me on my salary and income, but also in my future pension. But my health had deteriorated so much because of it. That's why I left. So, and part of my recovery then was to read about workplace bullying and gaslighting and institutional betrayal, and to understand the mechanisms, etc., which really helped me with my rumination in understanding what had happened to me and why it had happened, why people had targeted me, you know. And we were talking about the types of people who bully earlier. Well, I'd say part of that, I think, with the first line manager was learned behaviour. I think the fact that when I took a complaint of bullying to a senior officer and it wasn't dealt with before, again, that reinforced that sort of behaviour was acceptable. So will continue to be learned behaviour to others or to those people who were involved at that time. The gaslighting is so destructive and leaves your mind in a confused state where you're questioning your own perceptions of reality all the time, which leads to the rumination. So to learn all about that and to understand it really helped. And just going back again, so I was talking about with the bullies, the other thing was obviously, and as was mentioned, you know, the challenges and the momentum for change that I was pushing through probably left people or some of those individuals feeling insecure and threatened. But rather than having conversations, because I did try to engage in conversations about that necessary change, their response was a defensive sort of destructive response. So that's why I do what I do now, because of having experienced it, having garnered a good understanding. I felt it would be really helpful to try and explain to others about the different issues around workplace bullying and make people more aware, and also to make employers aware of, you know, you get someone who's hardworking and productive, etc., allow them to be bullied. The consequence is you will face sickness, you will face a change in productivity. You may lose good people who have to leave work, but not just the victims of the bullies, but also those are the work colleagues who witness it happening as well. You know, because some people won't speak up, they'll sit back and say, I'm going to put my head above the water because I could be next to be bullied, and this isn't a pleasant working environment, and they'll leave. And also, as those people leave, they will tell other people, this is the experience I had of that place. It's not a good place to work. So it's not good for businesses either, or organisations. So I'll leave it at that, because I could go on forever and I could have gone into far more depth. I hope it gave people enough flavour of my experience, and I have to be really careful because it's so emotive. I could go off into tangents on the depth of the different things that I experienced, but we don't have the time, so I'm just trying to give a short overview. So I'll leave that there and I'll hand that back over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I can imagine that is not easy to speak about, not easy to share. I think it's Brené Brown who says that vulnerability is the most sure marker of courage and bravery. And I think that sharing your story, I think things will have resonated with people in different places. I know there are elements of that I have experienced myself in previous organisations. And I think just having someone speak out about it is really important. And I really thank you for that. I know that you also wanted to talk a little bit, I'll move to the next slide, about the work you do at Stop Hurt at Work as an ambassador with them.
Yes, so we've got the slide up, but yes, our mission is to end workplace bullying through the development of meaningful prevention activities for organisations and the implementation of effective routes to address for individuals. So we're campaigning for change, and we're looking for formal recognition of workplace bullying as a problem that injures individuals and damages organisations. We are pushing for legislative change because, as has been mentioned, you know, with equality legislation, there are some people who have protection in the workplaces, but many others don't. And one of the factors that I always try to put across to people is, and this is still relevant to the Metropolitan Police now, and it's really interesting because Mark Rowley came in as the new commissioner after Louise Casey's report had identified, you know, racism, misogyny, homophobia, etc., and crucially bullying as well. And he came in and said, I'm going to sort out racism, misogyny and homophobia, which all are unlawful behaviours within the workplace. However, bullying isn't. And it was quite telling that he's never mentioned bullying when he said he's going to address Louise Casey's work. And one of the things the points that I try to making is the bullying behaviours, if they're learned and they are not challenged within the workplace, then they become acceptable behaviours. And those behaviours won't just be targeted at people who aren't covered by the Equality Act. They will also be targeted at people who are covered by the Equality Act. And therefore, organisations like the Metropolitan Police will continue to see cases in employment tribunals that have an equality element to them, because there's a route of redress for that sort of behaviour for people who are protected by the equality legislation. So really, it's just as important that they address workplace bullying within the workplace. And this isn't just the Metropolitan Police, this is across a number of organisations and employers. So we're doing the awareness raising from a foundation of research into new approaches and awareness. And we're creating proposals for those changes. And we select topics for research which concern any type of harassment and also bullying. Our research ultimately focuses on workplace effects and its concern with adults. Stop Hurt at Work is there to do a lot of this work. Alongside that, the founder, Nikki Eyre, runs a small company called Conduct Change, which does provide consultancy, coaching, training solutions which are rooted in the prevention of workplace bullying. Now, that work that Nikki does also includes a lot of, whilst there is no charitable status, also includes some charitable type work, because Nikki runs courses for people who have been harmed by workplace bullying in helping them to return to work, because if they've left that job, people who have suffered bullying do tend to be hypersensitive to the behaviours and actions of others, and she helps them to go back into workplace with a level of being able to manage that. And that feeling for people, feeling uncertain and untrusting going back into the workplace, is really, really powerful. I mean, I was fortunate that I left with a police pension, because I can certainly say that I would never ever trust a large organisation and go back and work for a large organisation again after my own personal experience within the Metropolitan Police. Not many people are fortunate enough to be able to leave at my age with some form of pension. So they do have to go back to work. So the work that Nikki does there is absolutely crucial in helping people who have suffered this harm to get back into the workplace.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's really helpful. And yeah, some lovely links that you can check out the work that they're doing at Conduct Change and at Stop Hurt at Work. I know that Katie has got the Q&A, so I'm hoping that we might be able to ask her if there are any questions. And yeah,
sure. I'll just have a look.
Thank you.
So there's a couple of comments, Jonathan, for you saying, really sorry this happened to you, Jonathan. You weren't the problem. Thanks for sharing your story. And then the questions are, somebody's written, it's difficult to know what to do with banter in the workplace. Sometimes I see people getting ribbed and I think that's too far, but they might seem okay. Should I go to management if it seems too much from my perspective? I've got my sort of opinion on that, but do you want to, what's yours, Jonathan, or do you want to do that together? I don't know.
I suppose, I mean, I come from an organisation where there is a lot of banter and there's a lot of inherent danger in it. I suppose my take on it has always been, and I try to stay clear at work of nicknames and stuff. Now, I played rugby for years, so I've, in my social life, I've had the banter and the nicknames, etc., and been part of it. But I've tried to stay clear of it at work, and for professional reasons, but also because if you don't like what someone's saying to you in your social life, you can choose not to associate with them. In the workplace, if it's being directed at you and you don't like it, you don't necessarily have that choice, so I think it's really, really difficult. I think if because I mean, there are times I think where the banter can help with a sort of a team spirit, but you've got to be really sensitive to people's feelings. And I think it's really worth checking, if you see it happening, checking in with that individual, whether they're okay, etc. And you don't necessarily always have to go to management. If you've spoken to them and they've said that that hurts, you could just go off and speak to the people involved and say, look, you know, this isn't good. This is impacting on this person, etc., in a very, very negative way. You know, and take that as a first step. You know, what are your thoughts, Katie?
Yeah, no, I had similar thoughts actually, really, and I think, you know, I guess it's always, if you've got a manager that you trust and you can have those types of, that kind of communication with, where you feel that you're able to talk about that and say that it's kind of upset you, even if it perhaps hasn't directly impacted you. I think anything to do with positive communication in teams and, you know, with management and just general kind of questioning of culture. I mean, I won't say the organisations I worked with, but I've certainly worked in a couple of organisations where there has been quite difficult culture, sort of similar to the police, I guess, actually, you know. So I've seen, you know, where, you know, I've been there actually myself, delivering training, and heard comments myself and thought, gosh, yeah, that's I'm not sure about that really. So yeah, you know, I think anything that kind of raises awareness and just makes people think a bit about how they're coming across or how they're being perceived, you know, is always going to be a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Somebody says, what is gaslighting? I hear about it a lot.
So gaslighting's when someone tries to distort your perception of reality. So, I mean, an example would be, a very, very good example would be me. I'll take this into domestic stance. If I was to go into the kitchen with my wife's was there, and she switched the kettle on and turned her back, and I switched the kettle off, and I said to her 10 minutes later, I thought you were going to put the kettle on. She said, well, I did. And I said, well, you didn't, because it's still cold, you know, and I'm distorting her. I'm just putting this into a simple context.
That's a good one.
You know, I've then left her questioning, well, I'm sure I switched that kettle on. And I'm saying, no, you didn't. I was watching. You didn't switch it on at all. You know, do you see? Yeah, that's the sort of thing. So it leaves the target of the gaslighting questioning their own perception of reality, to the point you can actually, when it's happening constantly, you start to become really, really confused. And when it's being used with, you know, people are questioning your interaction and relationships with other people, etc., and saying that you've said this when you haven't, etc. It's that's how it works.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. It's a good example, and it's manipulation, isn't it, really? And like you said, leaving people feeling confused. There's only one more question. It says, do you think any of your actions changed the way anything was done at your workplace in the end or since? Have you ever had an apology?
So my actions in changing the direction of the work, yes, that's deep rooted and in place now. But my actions in challenging the bully, no. Bullying, I was completely denied. I mean, journalists have written about this. An investigative journalist, Michael Gillard, has written about this, about my case. You know, whilst I was really, really ill, about a year later, I had a really nice boss, and he said, I really think you should, you know, report this as a workplace, sorry, as a grievance at work. And I did, and there was an investigator who was allocated to it. And there were a couple of problems there. One is that investigator was an ex-Metropolitan Police HR manager. So whilst the police claimed he was impartial, he wasn't. And at the time that I was off sick, and I had several witnesses, which included witnesses from the security service and the Home Office about, you know, these lies that have been said about me. And he'd said to me, oh, I'll come back to you for those. for those details, and he had my home email address, and I came back from a long period of sickness to find that he'd reported back saying there was no having spoken to the 3 people involved, you know, the 2 perpetrators and then the senior Met leader, had said that there was no evidence of bullying, and that I hadn't bothered to get back to him with a request for the details of the witnesses, etc. Well, he'd been emailing me on my work address while I'd been off sick, and he did have my work address. So I tried to put an appeal in, and then the appeal, that again, independent investigator, was a retired chief superintendent, who said, well, these witnesses, these alleged perpetrators already spoken to, so I can't speak to anyone, so I can't take it any further. So, you know, and yeah. I really wasn't very well at that time.
So you couldn't, and as you were saying, sorry, just a thought popped into my head about mediation that I was kind of like, you know, championing, and you know, because I do believe in it. However, I think when it comes to any mediation, both people that are involved need to want that to work, and also there has to be an element of kind of self-awareness for everybody, and a space to reflect on behaviour. And of course, so I guess in your particular case, from what obviously I've heard, that just wouldn't have worked, sadly, would it?
Not at all. I mean, you need honesty. You need a degree of honesty for mediation, and there was just complete denial there. You know, I mean, you know, with the acts of the gaslighting and stuff, you could see the dishonesty that was occurring anyway. But interestingly, when the journalists spoke to the Met about it, they came back and straight away and said, oh, the report by an independent investigator found like a case of bullying. So Michael Gillard said, well, could you tell me the name of that independent investigator? Can you confirm also that he's not a Met employer? And the Met said, we're not answering that question. So even the organisation's not prepared. No. And I'm still 8 months later for a subject access request for that, for a copy of that investigation, so I can provide that to Michael to perhaps write again. But you know, bearing in mind a subject access request is supposed to be answered within 28 days, and I'm waiting 7 months later. It's you know, there's still a load of cover up within the organisation.
Yeah, and I guess when I was talking about mediation, the situations I were in were obviously very different to yours.
Yeah.
That's I don't think there's anything else. There's no other questions, Catherine.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
Okay.
It just reminded me with that really good example of gaslighting that Jonathan had there. I'm a film fan, and I saw a tweet about a cinema that was reopening. It was called the Gaslight Cinema in New York, and the tweet was, the Gaslight Cinema is reopening next month after the first time in 100 years. And someone commented saying, no, it's not. And I thought that is such a good way of kind of going, that is what gaslighting is. It's saying, no, your reality isn't reality. Sorry. So obviously, like a cheerful, light-hearted way of illustrating what that is and how damaging it can be. Right, just a few more things. We've done the Q&A. We are ahead of schedule. So yeah, just a few more things for me. So thank you so much for joining today's Foothold webinar. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Our lovely producer will drop the feedback form link into the Q&A tab. And I will also be emailing out a feedback form as well, so we would love to hear from you. Our next webinar will be on conflict resolution. This will be next month, so just before Christmas. Somehow we've got to that point already. To hear about that webinar and future webinars as well, you can join our mailing list. So we've got a QR code there that you can scan with your phone, or you can go to myfoothold.org/mailing list, and you'll hear news from our charity and also information on every upcoming webinar. We also mentioned earlier on that you could, if it would be possible to donate, that would be fantastic and very generous of you. But there are other ways you can also support us. You don't just have to donate. So you could get involved to help us raise funds or deliver our services by taking part in a fundraising challenge. You can check out our Get Involved page for more information on upcoming events. You can become a volunteer. We have a volunteer at the moment, for example, working with marketing, who's just cracking on with some really important marketing tasks that we never really get time to get around to because we're busy with putting out resources that can support people and running events like this. So that would be really great. If you were interested in volunteering, just get in touch with us. And you can also host a fundraising event. We have resources to help you host a fundraising event or set one up. You just get in contact with us. I'll show you how to get in contact. You can visit our website, myfoothold.org. We are on all the social media platforms except TikTok. We're not quite there yet. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram. And you can also call us on the number here or email contact.us@myfoothold.org. You can call us to ask questions, or if you are looking for support yourself, if you're part of the engineering community or a family member is, we would love to hear from you and get you the support you need. So that is everything. Thank you so much to our speakers today, Katie and Jonathan. It's been a tricky subject to discuss, and there's been a lot of vulnerability from our speakers in talking about it, which I really appreciate. And yeah, we hope you have a good day going forward and hope to see you in a future webinar with Foothold. So thank you very much.